for a lot of us, finding that perfect home, that dream nest, that's a huge goal, right? It gives you this deep sense of belonging, a place that's really yours. But what happens when that dream flips, turns into a nightmare? When your safe space feels well watched by someone you can't even see. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into a story that's truly bizarre, pretty chilling actually. It's about the Broaddus family, their dream home at 657 Boulevard in Westfield, New Jersey, and the mysterious person known only as the Watcher. And what we're talking about today comes from, the family's own accounts, police reports, investigations that happened later, and just a ton of public speculation that's built up over the years. So our mission here is to try and unravel this really disturbing story, look at those incredibly unsettling letters, and examine the different theories about who the Watcher might have been, or, what was really going on. And to get a real handle on this mystery, let's start right at the beginning. June 2014, Derek and Maria Broaddus think they've just found their forever home.
So yeah, June 2014. Derek and Maria Broaddus. They've got 3 young kids, and they think they've seriously lucked out. They find this place, 657 Boulevard. And this isn't just any house. It's like a big one. $1.3 million, 6 bedrooms, 4 baths. It's right in Westfield, New Jersey, which is actually Marie's hometown.
Yeah, just a few blocks from where she grew up, apparently. So you can see why it felt so perfect, right?
Right.
The ideal place to raise the family.
Exactly. And they hadn't even moved in yet. They were still doing renovations. The kids would be playing outside sometimes while the work was going on. And it's during this time, doing renovations, that they find something, well, really weird, in the mailbox. A letter just addressed to the new owners.
Right. And it starts off sounding almost welcoming, but it gets sinister fast. It said something like, "Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood." But then it gets creepy. 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now. And as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. It goes on. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched in the 1960s. It is now my time.
Wow. Generational stalking. That's intense.
Yeah. And then these questions, really unsettling, possessive questions like, do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls? Why are you here? I will find out. But here's where it just goes off the rails into nightmare territory. The letter showed the Watcher had seen their kids.
Oh, no.
Yeah. You have children. I've seen them so far. I think there are 3 that I have counted.
Yeah.
And then, do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested better for me? Once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me.
That's a direct threat against the children.
Absolutely. And it finished with, welcome, my friends. Welcome. Let the party begin. Sign the Watcher. Just chilling.
Understandably, the Broaddus family must have been completely devastated.
Yeah.
Terrified, really. Especially with those threats about their kids. So Derek calls the police right away. But you gotta wonder, the police reaction, or maybe the lack of one initially, did that make things worse for them?
Well, think about it. It's just one letter. Anonymous. No witnesses. The police basically said, keep it quiet, don't tell the neighbors yet, and asked if they had any enemies, which wasn't much help.
Right. Very little to go on. Super frustrating.
Immensely frustrating. And it makes you ask the obvious question, did this happen before? Did the previous owners know anything?
Yeah, you'd think they'd have to say something, wouldn't you?
You'd think. So the Broaddus's pressed them, John and Andrea Woods. They'd lived there over 20 years, right? Initially, they said, nope, nothing happened. Smooth sailing. But then they did admit. Okay, they got one weird letter around May 26, 2014. Just days before they moved out.
Days before, wow.
Yeah, and they just tossed it, thought it was junk mail, some kind of prank, dismissed it.
Which really shows you something, doesn't it? How one person's nonsense can be another person's absolute terror. And it changes everything for them.
Exactly. That dismissal, while maybe understandable for them at the time, had huge consequences for the Broaddus family.
So despite being completely freaked out by that first letter, the family, they weren't quite ready to just ditch their dream home. They keep going with the renovations for a bit longer, maybe hoping it was just a one-off, some crank.
Right. Wishful thinking, perhaps.
But then, another letter shows up. And this one, even more detailed, even more terrifying. What kind of specifics are we talking about now?
Okay, this second one starts, welcome again to your new home at 657 Boulevard. So, right away, it's clear the watching hasn't stopped. And it shows just how closely they were being watched. Things like, the workers have been busy and I've been watching you unload cartfuls of your personal belongings. The dumpster is a nice touch.
They mentioned the dumpster. That's such a specific, mundane detail. Creepy.
Incredibly creepy. And what's really alarming here, the watcher now knew their names, well, one was misspelled, but still, knew the family name, and confirmed they'd heard the kids' names being called out.
Oh, wow. So they were close enough to hear conversations.
Seems like it. The letter even mentions seeing their little girl painting on the porch alone, asking, is she the artist in the family? That detail just proved they were being watched closely.
That's horrifying. Just confirming the surveillance like that.
And the threats got much, much worse. 657 Boulevard is anxious for you to move in. Will the young blood play in the basement, or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It's far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream.
My God. The basement threat. That's movie-level horror stuff.
Seriously. And it sounds like planning, right? Who has the bedrooms facing the street? I'll know as soon as you move in. It'll help me to know who is in which bedroom, then I can plan better.
Planning better. For what?
Exactly. And this claim of control. I have been in control of 657 Boulevard for the better part of 2 decades now. The Woods family turned it over to you. It was their time to move on, and they kindly sold it when I asked them to.
Wait, when I asked them to? Implying the watcher made the Woods sell.
That's the implication. Whether it's true or just part of the psychological game, who knows? But it adds another layer of creepiness. And it ends, Broaddus family. Welcome to the product of your greed. Greed is what brought the past 3 families to 657 Boulevard. And now it has brought you to me. Have a happy moving in day. You know, I will be watching.
The greed accusation. Wow. Just layers of psychological attack.
Yeah.
Any parent would be, beyond terrified. Knowing someone has these details, the kids' names, it's an unbearable weight. And they knew Westfield, but not this specific neighborhood block, right? So they're thinking, how does this person know all this? Is it a neighbor? Is the house bugged?
All those questions must have been swirling. Total paranoia, understandably.
So they called the police again, obviously. But this time, they also hired their own private investigators. They were desperate. That really shows how scared they were.
Absolutely. They weren't relying solely on the official channels anymore.
And the outcome.
Yeah.
Despite finishing the renovations. They just couldn't do it. The Broaddus family never actually moved in to 657 Boulevard.
The fear was too much. Knowing this watcher was out there, knew their kids' names, seemed to know their movements, it paralyzed them.
And eventually, a third letter even came.
Yeah, a third one arrived later. Apparently, the watcher was, disappointed they hadn't moved in. Can you imagine?
Unbelievable. So just 6 months after buying the place and getting that first letter, the pressure was just too immense, they cracked.
Understandably.
And by June 2015, a whole year after buying it, 657 Boulevard was back on the market. Their dream home, now just a source of terror.
And then things took another turn. The family filed a lawsuit against the previous owners, the Woods.
Right, claiming they knew about the watcher and didn't disclose it.
Exactly. But remember, the Woods only admitted to getting that one letter, the one they threw out thinking it was nothing. So the court ultimately dismissed the case.
So the lawsuit didn't work out legally for them.
No, but it did something else. It blew the story wide open. Suddenly, everyone knew about the watcher. Local news, then national, then online. It just exploded.
So the failed lawsuit basically made the whole thing public domain.
Pretty much. The story had an audience now, and since they couldn't sell the house right away, they ended up having to rent it out, which, must have been awkward explaining that situation to potential tenants.
I can only imagine. So with the story now public, everyone's asking, who was the watcher? Did this person even exist? Or was it something else entirely?
Well, nobody was ever arrested or charged. But investigators and the public definitely came up with some theories and potential suspects.
Okay, so where did they look first? What seemed most likely?
The most obvious place, really. The neighbors. You always look close to home first in cases like this. Maybe someone liked the renovations or just didn't want a new family moving in. Territorial stuff. And the family living right next door, the Langfords, they quickly became sort of the prime suspect.
Why them specifically?
Well, one of the sons, Michael Langford, was described by some neighbors as, a bit odd, though harmless. And the Langford family had lived there a long time, since the 1960s. Michael's father had passed away maybe 10 years before all this started.
Ah, okay. And the letter mentioned.
Exactly. The watcher claimed their father watched the house in the 1960s, and the Langfords had been there since the 60s. The father passed. It seems like a perfect fit. Maybe Michael took over the watching from his dad?
That connection seems pretty strong on the surface. So what happened with that lead?
Well, they managed to get DNA from one of the envelopes the letters came in. They tested it against Michael Langford's DNA. Not a match. And here's the twist. The DNA profile belonged to a woman.
A woman. Okay, that changes things. So suspicion shifted.
To the women in the Langford house, yeah. Specifically, Michael's sister, Abby. But they tested her DNA too. Also not a match. So, the Langfords, despite that initial connection seeming so plausible, were officially cleared.
Wow. So the most logical theory, the next-door neighbors with a generational connection, just didn't pan out. That must have been a setback.
A huge one. It shows how sometimes the neatest explanation just isn't the right one. You're forced to look broader, and the leads get thinner.
So, if not the Langfords, where else did investigators look? Were there other possibilities floating around?
Yeah, they explored a few other things, but nothing really stuck. There was this incident with a young guy who lived nearby. Someone saw his car stop near the house late one night.
Suspicious timing, maybe.
Maybe, but it turned out to be pretty isolated. No real evidence linking him to the letters. Then they thought about, like, former residents. Or maybe old housekeepers. Someone who knew the house really well from the inside, based on some of the letter comments.
That makes sense, given the details.
Yeah, but again, nothing solid came from it, just speculation. And then there's the theory. What if it was someone who wanted the house, but lost out?
The jealous, bitter angle.
Right. The Broaddusses weren't the only ones who put in an offer for 657 Boulevard. Losing out on a dream house can make people, well, pretty upset. Sometimes even irrationally so. But again, zero proof. Just another theory thrown into the mix.
So, lots of possibilities. But no hard evidence pointing anywhere specific. Which leads us where?
Well, it leads us to the most controversial theory of the bunch, the one that really got people talking, maybe even arguing.
Which is?
That the Broaddus family made the whole thing up themselves.
Whoa, okay, orchestrated the whole Watcher thing. Why on earth would they do that?
Well, people came up with a few potential motives. One idea was simple buyer's remorse. You know, their old house cost way, way less. Maybe they got into this $1.3 million house and realized, uh-oh, we've bitten off more than we can chew financially.
So create a scary situation to get out of the purchase.
That was one line of thought. Another, maybe more cynical theory was that it was some kind of elaborate scam. Buy the house, plant the letters, then sue the previous owners, the Woods, for not disclosing this Watcher.
Right, hoping for a payout from the lawsuit.
Exactly, and the fact that the Woods did get that one letter right before they moved out. Some people saw that timing as, well, convenient for this kind of theory.
But didn't the lawsuit get thrown out? And they filed it a whole year later, right?
Correct. The lawsuit failed, and the timing is a bit awkward for the quick scam idea. It wasn't filed immediately.
Okay, so what else? There was another, even more out there theory, wasn't there?
Oh, yeah. The movie deal theory.
Right. Staging the whole thing, the letters, the fear, all to eventually sell the rights to their story.
It sounds crazy, right? The amount of effort, the risk. But people have done strange things for notoriety or money.
Right.
And you have to look at the outcome. Yes, they sold the house eventually at a loss. Yes, they spent a fortune on renovations, investigators, lawyers. Probably over $100,000 easily.
A huge financial hit initially.
Initially, yes. But then in 2018, Netflix bought the rights. They made that series based on their story. So did they end up profiting significantly in the long run despite the initial losses? It's possible.
That definitely adds a complicated layer. The idea that real trauma, or maybe staged trauma, becomes entertainment and potentially profitable.
It raises uncomfortable questions, doesn't it? Where's the line between genuine suffering and a story that sells?
Wasn't there something else that cast doubt? Something about other letters?
Yes. This is maybe the most compelling piece for those who doubt the family story. In late 2017, the Broaddusses were renting the house out. And several neighbors, people who had apparently been critical of Derek and Maria, received new anonymous letters.
New letters. Like the Watcher ones?
Similar, yeah, hand-delivered. But these were signed Friends of the Broaddus family. Very weird, very unsettling, and reminiscent of the originals.
Okay. So who said those?
Well, here's the kicker. A year later, Derek Broaddus himself admitted it. In an interview with The Cut magazine, he confessed to writing and delivering those specific letters to the critical neighbor.
He admitted it. Wow.
He did. Now, he strongly maintained he had absolutely nothing to do with the original Watcher letters, but admitting to writing any anonymous, intimidating letters in that style, well, it certainly didn't help his credibility in the eyes of skeptics.
No, I can see how that would fuel speculation. It's definitely a strange twist. So, after all that, who was the Watcher? Was it a real person? A neighbor? like the Langfords initially seemed, some obsessive local? Or do you lean towards the more controversial idea, an elaborate high-stakes hoax by the family themselves, one that maybe accidentally, maybe purposefully led to a big Netflix deal?
The frustrating thing is, we just don't know. The truth is still out there, completely elusive. That female DNA found on the envelope, for instance.
Right, that could have potentially pointed towards Maria Broaddus if they tested it against hers.
Right.
To either rule her in or out definitively.
Exactly. But it seems the formal police investigation just kind of petered out, so we're left without that crucial answer, without any real closure.
It leaves you wondering, doesn't it? In this age of, constant information, viral stories, how do you tell what's real terror and what might be something else? Clever manipulation, maybe.
That's the core question this case leaves us with, I think. The story of 657 Boulevard is just this chilling reminder that sometimes the most disturbing tales are the ones that stay unsolved. They just hang there, making you question everything.
Well, thank you for joining us on this pretty unsettling deep dive into the mystery of the Watcher. Hopefully it's given you plenty to chew on. Until next time, stay curious and keep asking questions.